Hello, I'm Aneka from Made to Sew. In today's tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to draft a cutaway dart or how to add seam allowances to the inside of a dart. Now, you might want to create a cutaway dart if your dart has a large amount of dart volume, dart intake, dart bulk, whatever you want to call it, the central part of the dart that gets removed from the fabric or pattern when you sew the dart and gets pressed to one side. Now, if you have a large amount of dart bulk, you can find that this doesn't lay very nicely in the finished garment and looks quite unprofessional. Therefore, I would recommend that if your dart bulk is greater than 2 inches or 5 centimeters, you complete this technique and create what I call a cutaway dart. We're simply going to be adding seam allowances to the inside of the dart so that you won't have any bulk there. So it doesn't matter what pattern you're working with, let me show you this technique. Now for this tutorial, I'm going to be working with my Sew Copen pattern. And for this pattern, I actually did some dart manipulation and I moved the dart at the side seam into the shoulder seam. However, you can see here that it's created a very large dart. There is quite a lot of dart bulk or dart volume here. So that's where creating what I call a cutaway dart comes in. However, creating a cutaway dart is something that you can do to any dart. You will find in high-end ready-to-wear that often the dart bulk is removed. It can allow the garment to hang better and to fit better. So it's just something to consider when you're making your own garments. Now you can create a cutaway dart at the stage we're doing now, so in the pattern cutting stage, but you could also do it by cutting away the bulk once you have sewn the garment. In today's tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to do it at the pattern cutting stage. Now to make this really clear, I have used my green Sharpie to mark out the dart bulk or dart volume area so that you know what we're looking at. Now I've already gone ahead and I have traced this off onto some tracing paper. Now I'm working with a pattern that has seam allowances already included, so I've gone ahead and drawn those in red Sharpie all the way around the outside to make it nice and clear for you. You will obviously work with the seam allowance that's included with your pattern and always work with a sharp pencil. I am using Sharpie because it's nice and clear for you to see. Now you may also be working with a pattern that doesn't have seam allowances. Perhaps you've drafted your own pattern from a block or sloper. And I will be explaining to you where you're going to be adding the seam allowances to your cutaway dart in a second. So, if you are working with a cutaway dart, we're going to want to not have this bulk included in the pattern here. So very simply, all we actually need to do is to add a seam allowance to the dart leg on both sides. So I'm going to take my ruler. Now, in terms of how much seam allowance you should add, the easiest thing is probably to be consistent with the pattern that you're working with. So if you're working with 5/8 of an inch, 1.5 centimeters, add that onto your dart. However, if I was being very picky and I had the choice and I was doing this perhaps in industry, I would probably use 3/8 or 1 centimeter. But I don't want you to have to remember that your dart is a different seam allowance to the seam allowance around the pattern. So at the end of the day, you choose what works best for you. Now I'm going to take my Sharpie here and I'm going to use my ruler to measure 5/8 of an inch, 1.5 centimeters, or whatever seam allowance you want to use from the dart leg. And I'm going to simply draw that in. I'm also going to do the same from the other dart leg, and you will see that my two red lines will meet. Obviously, the smaller the seam allowance you use, the further into the bulk of the dart your new seam allowance lines will come. So what I have done here is I have drawn my seam allowance from my blue dart leg on this side and the same from the other side. So this amount in here, if I hash this in red, is all seam allowance. Now with a cutaway dart, you're still going to want to have the stitching line visible, and that is the blue line that I've got here for the dart. That is the stitching line of the dart. The red line is simply the seam allowance. And this area in here, if I draw that in green, is going to be cut away because I no longer require that. That isn't my dart bulk or dart volume because I have got a cutaway dart with a seam allowance or a seam allowance on a dart. And that is going to disappear. I'm going to cut that away now and show you. Now I'm going to cut on the 2 red lines to remove that centre of the dart that we no longer need, because these are our seam allowances. Do that on both sides. And this little piece is no longer required, so I can get rid of this. And now you can see the difference in the 2 pattern pieces. So it's the same pattern, it's simply that I have removed the dart volume or the dart bulk from this dart. Now, when you cut out your fabric, you're going to want to still trace your blue line onto your fabric. That's the stitching line of the dart, and that hasn't changed. However, you will be able to actually follow around the pattern and cut around this cutaway in your fabric as well, because the dart is going to be sewn as 2 seam allowances instead. Now, one thing to point out here is that by completing this cutaway technique at this pattern cutting stage, it doesn't give you much leeway to amend the position of the dart or the position of the dart point. I would be able to bring this back slightly if I decided that it was too close to my bust apex, because I've got a little bit of room to play with here. But if I had done a smaller seam allowance, I may find that I've only got 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres or so to play with in terms of the position of the dart point. And in terms of fitting, obviously I've only got the seam allowances that I've got, so I can't shift the dart very much. So it's going to be something that you'll want to do once you're really happy with the pattern. And you can make lots of them, obviously, with the cutaway technique that I've shown you here. By all means, make up a sample, make up a toile, calico, muslin, whatever we want to call it, and check it. Make sure that you're happy with the dart position and things. But if you do want to be able to tweak the dart in the real fabric, then you may want to leave the bulk of the dart in and cut it away once you have sewn the dart and are happy with it. The final thing you will want to do is to true your stitching lines. You will want to check that you're happy that the dart leg on both sides are the same length, and true any of the other seams that you have altered. You can follow along to my How to True Seams tutorial that will show you how to do this. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed the pattern cutting session and that you now feel confident about when you need to create cutaway darts or to remove the bulk from darts that you're working with. Thanks for watching and see you soon.